Okay, hi there. We are actually on this incredible train ride today because we have this topic that gives people headaches, that makes people feel sick to their stomachs, that bring out all sorts of responses in people when they're acting. And a lot of times they get into this mood or belief where they think they've done something wrong because, oh my gosh, there's this thing going on inside of them. And they haven't yet learned or trained themselves to work with this thing called visceral. This visceral component of acting is an element that is imperative to actors. This is a thing that will make and break your acting career. This is something that is of such importance. Let me just get started on this. This is exciting. There is so many times. Now, I have obviously seen a ton of acting classes, over 30,000 acting exercises. And I have seen actors of every kind of stature, people that are famous to people that are not famous. I mean, famous people in the hundreds and hundreds. It might even be over 1,000. I have no idea. I haven't counted. I don't care. That's their business. And to be frank, the only thing that I really care about is the acting technique. And I have been lucky enough to have been able to study. So the key is, and to teach. And the thing about this whole topic of visceral, this whole discussion of what is viscerality, is it is the ability that what happens when people become active. They become activated in their emotion, something triggers in them. Sometimes it comes from another person triggering something, or the experience triggers something in them, or it's their emotional preparation or their emotional activation. And that is part of the actor preparation that they actually train to be able to do they themselves in their own bubble, in their own ability to be able to quantify and access their own talent. So why is this such an incredible topic? Now, I have seen so much different stuff in the industries over the years, in the back areas, in the front areas, various different situations. And I can tell you that actors that train and learn how to be able to work with their visceralness, with their visceral component, their physical activations, when they're capable of being able to consistently find techniques that they can actually put that kind of felt sense, that type of ability in themselves, then they are capable of being able to achieve incredible results. Now, we're going to go through how to do this, how to work with it. I'm working right now on being able to figure out how to segregate this whole construct of being able to make the construction for the actor to be able to work with this, artists to be able to work with this, even musicians to be able to work with this, so that you can literally be able to construct your ability to be able to capitalize in a way that benefits you and the other and everyone you're working with, where you're able to add that whole element of reality to acting. Because being visceral is actually the component of what is reality in acting. It is what is actually the component of what it means to be real. See, when you have you're in an imaginary circumstance, which is almost like a security blanket environment, right? Where you're in an imaginary circumstance or an imaginary world when you act. Then you get into this situation where you're in this imaginary world, and what you want to be able to achieve the talent of is the ability so that you are completely, absolutely responsive within that imaginary world. So you're in a situation where you can actually activate or be activated, where something actually works, so that that visceral component starts to come out. All of a sudden, real feelings come out. And it's odd. It's an odd thing at first to really dissect and look at, because at first, when you start getting these like real feelings coming out, you know that you're under an imaginary circumstance or an imaginary world, or that you're under something that's you're in this illusion of the imagination of you're in this imaginary circumstance and world, but you've got these real impulses, these real feelings, these real gestures, these real literally these like visceral components of yourself all of a sudden get activated. So it's like almost like there's a component of this, even for musicians on stage, where they're in this highlighted area of themselves, and they're working in this way that it's just this surreal thing where you're involved in this thing where you know that what you're doing is working, it's connected. There's this element where there's this absolute realism that's going on in your acting, and there's this sensation in your acting that you may feel often that needs to become another one of your acting friends. You want to befriend this feeling and this approach, that there's this feeling that you're floating. So you feel like you've literally kind of transcended. Transcended is one of the ways in ancient acting. All of a sudden, people would say all the time back in the day, long years, and I mean hundreds of years ago. And there's texts on this where people will talk about when they go on stage that they would have transcended. They transcend their ability so that they know that they're under this imaginary world blanket, but they actually have these real stimulations. They have these real feelings. They have these real visceral components to the work. And what this whole construct of emotional preparation does for an actor is this intense ability that can also have this quiet subtleness that will allow, and basically what will happen is the more time you spend within this imaginary world, all of a sudden there's like more and more stuff that will just become visceral components. All of a sudden you'll be like, yeah, and you'll just, start, working off of the imaginary circumstance. Hear this? You're working off of the imaginary world. You just, it's all of a sudden you fall into the belief that the telephone is actually hooked up, even though it's not. It's a set prop. These kinds of things where you just start to have this at home feeling about where the surroundings that you're in, that there's this element, or maybe you're over at somebody else's place and you got that feeling that you're in their space. And that's an element that actually happens with this component of realism, where you're building up this thing that's this visceral component of acting, which is this component of this element having to do with realism. Now, so this is the introduction to this topic, and this topic goes deep. And I caught myself today a little bit flustered, but not in ways that are negative, just the reality of bringing up viscerality, the topic of viscerality. See, you might want to, even in certain terms, you could think of the emotional preparation experience, the experiences of emotional preparation, is you're purposefully setting up, you're purposefully in a situation where you're literally absolutely ruffling your own feathers. You're ruffling your own feathers. You're activating your own feathers. You're ruffling your own feathers. And then you come into the imaginary circumstance. And then all of a sudden you're in this like situation where all of that just starts to come out. And this is not something where it comes out because you're forcing it to come out. And I'm going to tell you the secret to emotional preparation, the secret to finding these components of emotional activation is the ability for you to actually fully relax. So you've got the being side of the acting work, which is the emotional activation, which also includes the traditional emotional preparation techniques, which is making sure that you included the inner life or the emotional life of the scene before it. So if you've come from being chased by somebody in a parking lot, all of a sudden you come into the scene with that prior experience. So this is a piece of the emotional preparation that you would activate. And you would get that by activating that emotion of being chased, or that the horror or the scaredness that you might feel, or whatever the circumstance is that you've crafted. So this component then is the ruffling of your feathers. You're ruffling your feathers. Then you jump into the imaginary circumstance, and you want to find components within your imaginary circumstance that causes you to relax. Now, why would you want to do that? Oh, there are so many reasons. You absolutely benefit the more you relax in acting. The more you're capable of being able to do this process, this technique, the technique of purposefully upsetting yourself intentionally with an emotional ballpark. So then you come into this circumstance and all of a sudden you find your relaxation. All of a sudden your talent sparks off in you. What happens? Whew. What happens in you is all of a sudden you start having visceral responses going on in you, one after another. A feeling will pop up, feeling will pop up. All of a sudden, your co-star will say something that will spark something all of a sudden, and it's like literally you're in a boxing ring and you're just going back and forth, dodging whatever the heck is going on. And that's exactly the experience of what it is to be visceral. You're putting yourself in a place not of a disadvantage, but you're putting yourself in a place where you're acting. You're putting yourself in a place where you have full activation. And you are doing the technique of acting, which is the being side of the technique outside of the work. And before that, you've done all kinds of written work, which is the scholastic part of the work, where you're really doing the introspection, where you're really starting to write the lyrics, or you're writing the ability of what it is that you're works, so that you're able to access things that actually activate you. So when you think about those items, when you work with those items and that element, all of a sudden something clicks. Something clicks in you, and all of a sudden, whew. Now, before you let it out in your emotional preparation, get that acting muscle working for yourself and dive through into the imaginary world, and then just find something to relax on. And all of a sudden, what will happen? You'll start getting activated by what's prior. This is what professionals do. This is the ability to absolutely supersede in acting. You want to be able to achieve this. Now, if you are alone and you don't know how to practice this alone, pull up one of these spoon rivers. Make it a simple one, maybe with only like 6 or 8 lines. And practice. Work on, get the acting emotions list from the emotional preparation site, and work with some of those emotions, and work with the ones that you can actually make lists of, that you can actually write, and that you can actually activate. And then practice. Work on that thing. Activate that thing. Work on it after you feel something's awake, a little bit trying to be awake in you. Then jump into the lines of the text and be able to work on it. Now, look, this is what we do. We're doing examples after examples, and we're showing the absolute rehearsal techniques, not the performance techniques, necessarily. I mean, we'll see. We'll get there. But I'm making sure that we've got the rehearsal techniques of being able to do this with rehearsal. So you're able to go in and out, in and out, in and out. And what you will find in yourself will reveal parts of yourself that you may never have known that you even had before in your life. And this is the point of art, in my opinion. The point of art is to be able to have self-discovery. So when you are working with this component of being able to find self-discovery, you never know what you're going to find. I don't know. Maybe you find a part of yourself that is more feministic than you thought that you had. I don't know. Maybe all of a sudden, you find this masculinity that you just didn't think that you had. It's possible. Then you work with that masculinity. All of a sudden, that is another component of your work. All of a sudden, you add that to your acting list. All of a sudden, you work with this new thing. All of a sudden, you're finding and discovering this element of yourself, which you can then put into writing. Start to explore what's the element of masculinity? What's the element of femininity? How do you find your femininity? How do you find your masculinity? What it means to you and how that changes. And what I would suggest is about a month or two later, probably about a month or 6 weeks, you want to go back into your own notes in your acting journal. And you want to look and say, look, this was how I found my masculinity before. Is it the same or is there some changes? And so you're updating your book of emotional preparations. Do we understand that? It's a book that you create, which is the component of the ability for you to be able to find talent in your acting journal. So this is absolutely key. Absolutely critical for you to be able to find this component, mind this component, work with this component, have that flexibility of having visceral moments. Now, this is exciting, right? This is exciting. Acting's exciting. There is so much to this work. There is so many things that you will end up finding, that you will discover about yourself. And I kid you not, there is things that you will find that you never, ever, ever, ever thought that you even had opinions about, that you ever thought that you had feelings about. And all of a sudden, you will find maybe even compassions that you didn't know that you even had. Because you're in this place of discovery. You're using artistic work as an artist now and not just as a performer. And performing is great. There's a lot of self-discovery in performance. I understand that. And this is also how to be able to merge the two so that you're capable of not having, you keep your career going because you're capable of finding and mining within yourself new self-discoveries that are actually genuine to you, real interests within you, etc. So I want to address this topic here that, to be honest, is this whole thing. And initially, what ends up happening when you're working in acting, you're in a situation where you're told by the teacher or the instructor, or you find out information like here, and you know that there's normally people say, you get your emotional ballpark set up, then you have to forget about your emotional ballpark and go into the work. Well, it's good. there's some advice there that I've seen people follow over the years, and that they've been able to find stuff. Although it's taken a lot of trial and error, I would much rather have the inclusion of the fact that you have to activate that emotion, because the activation of the emotion is that element then that you want to, before you start gushing everything out, you want to get into the imaginary circumstance, not so you can act or perform what's gushing out of you, but so that it can be included with you starting to receive your partner. All of a sudden, you can start to receive what they're doing, and everything can mix together in this hodgepodge or this concoction of art that just starts to form in your scenes, because you've worked on this construct of technique. But a lot of times what will happen is that people will start to get responses in their acting, and they will start to think to themselves. I mean, I remember a long, long time ago where I can relate to this here and there. But the thing is that people will get to a point where they will actually think they've done something wrong. That they've done something wrong because there's such a strong feeling coming out of them. Or all of a sudden they get like this, like, grief just hit them. And they'll think, oh my God, like, oh my goodness. Because the thing is, it's like this is just grief, just strikes them. Well, this whole element of grief overcoming you, or having this visceral response in you of all of a sudden you feel like this weight on your shoulder. That's what you want to experience when you're actually in your acting. So this is something that you want to be able to have in you, but not necessarily perform. So this is a part of the visceral reality of acting. This is part of the response that if you look at people that are actually going through real grief, they'll sometimes be slower. Their hands might be heavy. They might carry their body a little bit differently. They might be in a situation where they're just not fully operating themselves because they've got this weight. That's visceral acting. That's real acting. Everybody wants reality. That's reality. And the only thing that you need to add to that is you need to add exactly, fully, absolutely receiving your partner, receiving the imaginary circumstance. So you're not doing that alone. It's not something that's happening alone. You're not reactivating it on purpose. It's happening because there's interaction. And this is key. You want to absolutely be able to get your emotional preparation and your visceral responses absolutely reactivated by those around you in the scene. Now, I can tell you this short story, and that is a short story about a star in acting realizing that they didn't want to be able to, well, they had some visceral responses to what was happening to them in the scene. So what they did was they allowed themselves to say, listen, why don't we give this line to somebody else? We can give this line to somebody else. We can work with these elements and put these things in different areas. And then that was a way that freed them up in their acting to be able to have those visceral responses. And then when it came time for those responses to actually happen to them in acting, it did. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be that you walk into the imaginary circumstance and then all of a sudden you collapse on the floor. But it would definitely be helpful for you to acknowledge that you have weak knees because there's a visceral response happening in you. So we're looking at what is viscerality in acting. We are looking at how to be real with visceral responses. And we're looking at how to have visceral releases. Now, let me make one quick thing here. Now, visceral releases are those things that will shoot out of you. There's emotion that will shoot. There's restriction sometimes. There'll be these elements of restriction. All of a sudden, you'll be in a scene or in an acting exercise, and you'll feel this restriction. All of a sudden, there'll be this restriction in your chest. Your partner will say something to you, and there's this restriction. And this isn't because of nerves and acting. This is because of emotional preparation, because of emotional activation. And those kinds of things you want to then work through and continue. But those are visceral responses. There's visceral responses that literally want you to just, there's vomit, emotional vomit that you want to spit out. These are elements that you want to be able to isolate. So we have the ability here to be able to look at this whole construct of acting in this new way that is able to permission yourself. You want to permission yourself in your acting to be able to have these visceral responses. These are the moments of reality. You're looking to add those moments of reality. Now, typically in the classrooms, all across the different classrooms for acting, this would be a thing that maybe in the second year, so after about a year of study, all of a sudden people would be in a situation where they start working with things like handicaps or impediments or changes in their behavior that hopefully is because they're working hard enough, and you're able to work hard enough to be able to start finding that those kind of certain emotional preparations or those certain emotional activations are actually causing some hindrances in your work, like that stuffed upness in your chest. There's elements where you have stuff that's beyond stage. It's not stage fright. There's nothing like that. We're just dealing with a restriction from grief or a restriction from sorrow, and that element of how sorrow actually affects you. And then what that does is that you're then able to get into this situation where you're able to be loose enough with that to then start isolating the ability to be able to start forming that visceral component of the work actually into this activation. So this activation then starts to actually get stronger and stronger. You get to be able to get isolated and isolated until it becomes a handicap, until it becomes something that you have an emotional ability to isolate that component, until all of a sudden you've got a restriction with a visceral, sharp visceral component of you, where you actually feel like you're actually able to then, work with handicaps, with impediments, with things like that changes your actual physicality. So that's how the visceral components actually over time float in to the ability to then start to gain control over those elements. And it is very, very key. Very, very key. So the one thing I do have to put here, which is absolutely key, and what I say key because I don't know how else to describe it. These things are important because initially I absolutely train people to make sure that they're working in a way that is able to, you activate the emotion, and then before that emotion spills out of you in your emotional preparation, you get it somehow into the imaginary world, the imaginary circumstance. Well, and when you're in that ability, the way that you really want to be able to do that is by relaxation. So you work so that there's this relaxation response that happens within you. That is this component that literally by the cause of relaxation, the talent that's inside of you that you've been able to muster and work with spurts out of you the more you relax. So the more you relax, all of a sudden, the more you feel it. But at the same time, you take in your partner and you don't know what they got going on. And then you're juggling the two things because this is a reality. You got actual real stuff going on. You got real feelings going on. You got real responses coming out of you. And then you've got responses of receiving them. And this comes from the practice of being able to do this element where you're activating yourself and then you're going into a place where you're relaxing. You relax element, and you go back and forth, and you go back and forth, and you go back and forth. Now, you probably do this 25, 30 times in class, and then you start to get the technique down so that you're actually in a situation where you can isolate an emotion. So you go to isolate an emotion, and then you start to realize that with some emotions, you get visceral responses, and in other emotions, you don't get anything at all. So you work with one thing and you get one response, you work with another thing and you don't get any response, and you've got this construct here, you're not sure what to do because you just keep working through this. And then what will end up happening is that you'll end up having more and more options because you've done more internalized work that is able to draft out what it is that you're actually doing in your acting journals. So the absolute key to this whole thing is the whole point of relaxation. You get relaxation and you're finding the ability to not force anything around you. There's no force that's happening at all. You are literally in a situation where the more you relax, the more this thing comes out, the more this thing comes out. Now, this leads to another kind of important element because I absolutely teach that you need to release your emotions after you do your acting. And it's true. And it's difficult because you're working in a way that you're capable of being able to literally debrief yourself from your emotional preparation, your emotional activation, and your imaginary circumstances, and all the experiences that you felt in the imaginary circumstance. So you're literally piece by piece, just like you've constructed these elements for yourself for your acting, you're literally now at that point of deconstructing. Well, what happens if you need to use that emotion again? And what happens if you're in a situation where you need to go back into that element? Don't worry, you'll get there. You just reconstruct everything, you put it in. There's a time and a place for all this stuff. And when you're active and you're able to put this stuff together, do preparations for your acting, and then have real life experiences in your acting, then you put that away again and put everything out. And then all of a sudden, you've had the experience in life of acting, and you have the freedom and the expression and the ability to have a good life and an ability not to have acting baggage in your life. And this is an incredible point because it ties in to this whole construct of what is visceral or viscerality in acting. There's going to be these components of your ability to be able to isolate this stuff, put this stuff down, work with this whole ability, et cetera, et cetera. So remember that this is something that you want to be able to achieve. You want to be able to achieve both the construction and the deconstruction of your work in acting so that you can actually achieve greater and greater emotional intensities in the future. So there was another point here I had to make, but I think we're doing pretty well. We might cut it short today a little bit, but there's still a couple of questions. Okay, so this other point here is, now viscerality will mean that when you've got two people working like this, you might have to, respond. You're going to have to get into a point of view where you are in a response to the other actor. So you're in this situation where you've got this natural interaction and you've got responses that you actually are going to have to interact. So there's going to be things where you're going to be busy doing something, or you're going to be concentrating on something, or you're going to be involved in something, and you're going to have to kind of juggle what you're doing to be able to put that down for a second, to be able to work with whatever visceral responses are coming at you with the other person. It's just part of the juggling. And that, again, is another thing that's not you doing anything wrong in acting. It's the fact that now you're dealing with this thing called realism. You're dealing with this component of realism that's absolutely important. And these are the ways to be able to handle it. You might have to drop what you're doing and then go calm another person down. And that's exactly works to be able to work. So look, I hope that you're enjoying me doing these broadcasts, and I'm absolutely fine with the fact that there's been few people come and go, and that's fine with me. There's been comments that I appreciate, and there have been messages that I appreciate. I think that that's fantastic. Don't feel pressured in any way to do anything in terms of call to action on me. But I'm just saying that if you're willing to or wanting to work on stuff, I'm still working hard to figure out some things that will be good to be able to do, that will help people be able to learn acting. And this is vital. And this whole construct of visceral experience is something that is not talked about a lot at all. And it may not even be talked about at all. People will be like, visceral, what does that even mean? And it's something I've been teaching for years now. And it's something that when people hear it, they go, wait a second, something goes off on them and they go, wait, there's something that they're missing out on, that they knew that they were missing out on in their acting. And by studying this component of what is visceral, all of a sudden, they're able to reignite this component of their own work so that they can actually have this massive realism happening in their work. And I've seen incredible breakthroughs, which have gone on to lead people to all sorts of stuff, including getting parts and all kinds of things in the industry. And then their careers get started or whatever the case is. So the reality to this is very key. So let's take a short break here, and then I will figure out if we're going to close it down or not. Okay? Thank you very much. Hi, I'm inviting you to actually join me live on the internet. And if you would, you can bring your own emotional preparation. We can work on emotional preparation together, and we can really hone down and help build out that talent within inside of you. Now, even if all it is you want to just bring an emotional preparation, do a spoon river, I don't mind. Come, join us, and absolutely practice the talent of your own acting. Okay, I'd like you to join me live on the internet. Absolutely doing your acting and doing emotional preparation. Now, one of the things that the casting directors always make comments on in the back rooms is whether or not a person can do a piece of material with one emotional preparation and then switch their emotional preparation and do the same piece of material. And we can practice doing that on our live feeds together. So join me. Find the information on the website Emotional Preparation, and then you can join me and we can broadcast you live on the internet, and it will be fantastic. Okay, so I want to say thank you very, very, very much today. I've had a blast doing these things, and I'm still going to work at it, and I'm still going to figure some things out and make some adjustments. And it's always going to be like that. Acting is a career, it is an ability to be able to find self discovery of yourself in acting, of yourself by working with the doing, by doing the being side of the work, by being able to activate stuff, work with it, see what you discover, make adjustments, all that stuff. It's all just absolutely fantastic. So if you'd like to join me or work with whatever it is, let me know in the comments sections or send me an email. Okay, so thanks very, very much and have a great day. Okay.